The first one came down through a crack in the ceiling right above the instrument panel. It came down reaching around with its head, and with the brown bands flowing in behind it, slick and slimy. The mouth was open and you saw the white inside that gave the deadly reptile its name, Cottonmouth. I reached for Howard's collar where he sat in the pilot seat and yanked him backward, dumping him on the floor. He shouted, "What the hell, Tolliver?" and ended it in a gurgle when he saw the snake drop, hit the panel, and land in the seat he had just vacated. Baylor laughed and said, "Let this old country boy show you how to handle him." He advanced an open hand toward where the snake was writhing around on Howard's leather seat cushion. He moved the hand slowly. His bald head, scarred from a broken bottle fight with another con just a month earlier, was suddenly wet with sweat. His mouth was open and you saw a lot of purple gum broken up by a few jagged, tobacco-stained teeth. We were awfully quiet. Marty Howard was in a state of shock at what had almost happened to him. Baylor was concentrating so hard you could almost hear a whirring going on in his skull. And as the man in charge, I was wondering just what in hell my responsibilities were in this particular situation. Where would I stand if Baylor got bitten? Where would I stand if he died? Ah! That was Baylor. The snake had gone for his hand and he'd gotten it out of the way in time, then brought the other hand down behind its head and grabbed it up off the seat. All in one motion, he smashed the snake's head against a wall of the cabin, then dropped it to the floor and crushed the head under his heel. "Pretty smart for a country boy, isn't it?" he said, and opened the plane's door. I said, "Don't get nervous, Tolliver, don't get nervous. I'm just getting rid of this thing so it don't draw flies." He threw the dead snake out and closed the door. I said, "That's not going to look too bad on your record, Baylor. You didn't do yourself any damage getting that thing out of here." He laughed and said, No, that's gonna make a hell of a lot of difference." The laugh was a high-pitched cackle. It did something to you at the base of your spine and the back of your neck. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Here, take a look," and opened the door again. The mist lay over the ground like a tattered blanket, and at first I couldn't see through it. Then I saw movement under there, and all of a sudden it was in focus, and that's when I thought I was going to be sick. There were thousands of them, their obscene bodies forming strange knots and tangles, wriggling, writhing, contorting. The white mouths of many of them opened wide. Baylor said, "A plane coming down on them this way, most time they just call away, but we're in that nesting area, and they're gonna stay." I said, "That one getting in here was a freak thing though, wasn't it? They don't figure to be..." He laughed again, but the sweat all over his face was from fear. He said, "Stop fooling yourself, Tolliver. There are a million ways they can get in here, and they're gonna use them all." It had started about 2 hours earlier. We didn't like the way some of the cons were acting at Pardee Farm, and had been decided to relocate a couple of them. That's the modern idea, and Dave Wilson, the warden at Pardee, was all for doing things right. In the old days, you'd clout them around when they started that behind the back of their hands whispering, and you thought they might be planning a break, and you wanted to knock that idea out of their heads before it got too far along. But the modern idea is to separate the potential troublemakers, and that's what we were doing with Buddy Baylor, moving him to Rutland Farm, 200 miles further down toward the Louisiana Gulf Coast. Buddy, a happy kid's name, but Baylor was no happy kid. He was past 40. He'd spent pretty near half his life in the swamp jails of Louisiana and Mississippi for killing his wife and her lover with an axe. And if you ever took that laugh of his for him being happy, you'd be making a mistake. Baylor wasn't happy. Baylor was a little nuts. Well, we moved him down by commercial plane. Of course, the state paid the tab. The plane was a 3-seater owned by a swamp pilot named Marty Howard. Howard's main business was flying trappers and sportsmen in and out of the bayous, but he was available for prison work whenever we needed him. His only concern was that the con he was transporting didn't get rambunctious while the plane was in the air. We assured him there was no likelihood of that happening with Baylor. Baylor might have been a little nuts, but he was shrewd too. Baylor knew I'd be sitting behind him ready to lay that big horse pistol alongside his head if he gave me any reason to do it. I was the head of the guards at Pardee, and I wasn't about to let a con make a fool out of me. I hadn't gotten up there that way. The trip should have taken only an hour. Even with the mist filling the bayous like cotton batting, we should have done it in less than 2. But somewhere along the line, we started losing gas, losing it fast. And pretty soon Howard was looking for a place to put the plane down and cursing about a loose gas cap. That's all it could be, damn it, a loose cap. I know we don't have a leak. He was circling around trying to find an opening through the mist-shrouded trees. We're right in the neighborhood of a drop station, he said. The closer I get us to it, the better. By a drop station, he meant a wooden shack on a block of cement where gasoline was stored to help out in emergencies like ours, and others where there were boats involved. He was quiet for a few minutes after that, and then he said, "All right, this ought to do it." And a minute later, we came pancaking down in the swamp. Howard blew his breath out. It was a sigh of relief. He hadn't been all that sure we were going to make it. He said, "All right, we're in okay shape now. We're close enough to the drop station to walk up there and get some more gas. We'll put it in and I'll see that the cap's on right this time. We can't take off right from here. The ground's too soggy for that, I can tell. It'll stop us from lifting off, but we're close to higher, harder ground, and with some gas in the tank, we can taxi up there and then take off." "No problem, no problem." "No problem." Well, of course it didn't work out that way. He bent over his control panel, checking something out. Baylor and I watched him. I was deciding it would be Baylor and me that went for the gas, and then the cottonmouth came through the ceiling, aiming for the back of Howard's neck, and I yanked him out from under it just before it dropped. Baylor killed it, using a technique I wouldn't try if you put a gun to my head and ordered me to do it. But after he'd done it, where were we? I complimented him on what he'd done. I told him I'd enter it on his record and maybe it would help him later on, but he laughed in that crazy way of his and showed me that wriggling, writhing carpet of cottonmouths outside the plane. "We're in their nesting area," he said, "and they're going to stay. There are a million ways they can get in here, and they're going to use them all." We armed ourselves with wrenches and hammers. I wasn't going to use the pistol unless I had to. I didn't want to take a chance of putting a hole in the plane. I didn't think twice about whether or not to let Baylor have a hammer. We were going to need him. We were going to need Howard too, but I didn't know if we had him. Howard was on the edge of hysteria. Pumas, tigers, anything else, he'd have probably been okay. But snakes do something to some people. They turn your blood to water. They turn your legs to straw. That's what was happening to Howard. There's one of the sons of bitches. A white mouth came up through a crack in the floor, the fangs extended. I jumped at it, stomping like a madman. My boot heel caught it just right and broke its head open, popping it like a sack of black filth. Incredibly, its body continued on into the plane, coiling up behind the crushed head and writhing all over the floor of the cabin. I tasted vomit in my mouth and swallowed it down. Baylor said from somewhere beside me, "Watch yourself jumping at them that way, Tolliver. They just might reach around and get you in the ankle." Howard sobbed, "Oh my God, here comes another one." He was dancing, jigging to keep out of the dead one's way. And he was wrong about it being another one. It was another 2, another 4, another 7, then even more. They were pouring in on us from cracks and holes all over the plane. Baylor and I were working pretty well, cracking away at them with our hammers and wrenches. But I had to curse Howard and backhand him across the face to get him into it. "Come on, damn it, we don't have time for that whimpering. Start hitting, start hitting." He got into it then, but he was still shrinking back, and there wasn't an awful lot he could get done that way. "We can't keep it up much longer." That was Baylor shouting in my ear. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was twitching around the mouth. His eyes were glassy. I shouted back, "What the hell else can we do?" He said, "We need that gas. We've got to get out of here. Someone has to go for it." I started to say something, and he waved his hammer at the window. "Look there." Between taking raps at those evil darting heads, I sneaked a quick look where he was pointing. A big alligator was lumbering out of the mist straight toward the plane. Its mouth was open. What looked to be long strands of spaghetti were hanging down over its jaws. But of course it wasn't anything as innocent as that. It was cottonmouths, one monster devouring others. Baylor shouted, "He'll eat them by the hundreds. They're always doing it. The snakes know it. They'll try to get out of his way. I could make a run for it." I broke in on him. "Not you, Baylor. You're the con. I'm the guard. We don't do it that way." His eyes were wild. 1-2 bites and you're dead, Tolliver. With me, I could take a lot more. I come from the bayous. I had it happen before. I can take more of them than you. I got some immunity to the venom. I said, "We don't do it that way, Baylor. I'll make the run." It wasn't the kind of thing you think too long about. You want to move before you've got time to change your mind. I got Howard to tell me where the drop station was, which way to head. Then Baylor yanked the door open and I jumped out, not looking, just jumping. Jumping out into whatever it was going to be like out there. Right into the heavy the sickening stink, the jabbing heads, the white mouths unhinging. And then I was into them up to the ankles with the big gator no more than 15 feet away and shoving his snout into them, feasting on them. I started running. My mind was spinning with the horror of my situation. I was sloshing through snakes, kicking my way through them, swinging my head like a rearing horse so I wouldn't have to see. Then pain in both legs, sharp, tearing pain. And then I was stumbling, falling, screaming in sheer blind terror as I felt the crush of their wriggling bodies all about me. Would I drown in them? Good God, would I go down and be buried alive? Could there be a greater ordeal, a worse way of dying? Kick your legs, Tolliver! Kick your legs, man! Kick your legs! Baylor's voice. He was pulling me to my feet. He was dragging me back to the plane. His hand was an iron claw under my arm, and I was sobbing, sobbing like a baby. We reached the door. I saw Howard's white face above me. He reached down to take me. Baylor pushed. They had me in. Baylor barked, "Knock them back, Howard! Knock them back the best way you can. It's more important that I do this." He was yanking at my boots and socks, pushing my trouser legs up. I had a vague, shadowy sense of Howard swinging a hammer like a maniac. Was I dying or only fainting? Everything was blurred and shifting in front of me. Then Baylor rose up before me, glistening in sweat and menacing me with a knife. He rose and fell toward me, and I felt his knife digging into my legs and feet. And then his mouth was there, sucking, spitting, sucking the poison out of me and spitting it out. Then he rose again. "This ain't no thing about cons and gods anymore, Tolliver," he said. "This is just surviving. I got a lot of that poison out of you, but some will pump right into your heart if you excite yourself. So don't try stopping me, Tolliver. You're dead if you do." He had the door open again. He had the knife in one hand and nothing at all in the other. I said, "Baylor," but it came out as a sort of weak gasp, and he jumped out without even looking back. I heard Howard mutter, "The ugliness of it. It's more than you can take in. The snakes, the gator." I sat up. I could see Baylor swinging his arm back and forth, slashing with the knife, moving away from the plane. He disappeared suddenly, lunging into the mists. Howard said, "I'm sorry about crapping out on you back there, Ben. I'm all right now. Maybe that big gator taking the pressure off is helping." The floor of the plane was covered with dead snakes, some of them still moving, but no more were coming in. The gator was right up against the plane outside, bumping into it with his heavy body. You could hear the awful sounds of him gorging himself and the endless of the snakes. I'd been lying on the floor of the plane, right in there with the dead snakes. That's where Baylor had doctored me. I sat up now. My voice came out in a whisper. I couldn't stop him from going. I was too weak. They'll say I screwed up everything back at Pardee. It'll cost me my job, my reputation. Even if we don't get out, everyone will know what happened and laugh at me for it. I got myself snake bit, let a con get away. Howard wasn't listening to me. He was muttering, "By God, we could do it now. If we had a teaspoonful of gas, just enough to taxi us." He was in the door of the plane looking out. I dragged myself to my feet and came up behind him, stepping on dead snakes. The plane ran yellow and black with their insides, and it stank in a sickening way I can't even begin to describe. I looked out over Howard's shoulder. The gator's snout was half covered with snakes. He was rooting in them, throwing his head back so they would slide down his throat, swallowing them whole. Further on, you saw nothing but mists, with the shadowy outlines of trees somewhere in there. I said, "Don't tell me I'm seeing what I'm seeing." A figure was stumbling toward us. One hand was swinging downward at the ground. You saw a knife in that hand. You saw a 5-gallon can of gasoline in the other. You heard a scream, a howl. Howard muttered, "The poor bastard." Baylor reached the wing of the plane. The gas tank was there. He had snakes on both legs. One was biting at him just below one knee and the other just above the other knee. He howled in awful pain, brushed at them with a hand, then got himself up to the gas tank. He unscrewed the cap and started to pour the gasoline. The snakes were coiling around his legs and biting at him all the while. We could hear him grunting, panting. At last, he flung the can away and closed the gas tank. His hands went to his legs. They each came off with a snake. He smashed their jabbing heads together, smashed them again and again, maybe losing his mind. Then, lurching, staggering, he came toward the plane, and we pulled him in. Thought I was gonna take off, didn't you, Tolliver? He went to the floor like a sack of old clothes. His trousers were ripped to shreds where the snakes had bitten him. His face was a mass of ticks and twitches. Saliva dribbled out of both corners of his mouth, and his eyes were fastened on mine, yet didn't seem to see me. Thought I was gonna take off. There was nothing to it after that. We taxied out of that soggy ground, rolling over hissing snakes, and past the big gator, still gorging himself on them. We reached the drop, which was up on higher, drier ground, and filled our tanks the rest of the way there. A few minutes later, we were in the air and completing our trip to Rutland. They put both Baylor and me in the infirmary there. I was sick, but not too bad off because Baylor had sucked most of the poison out of my system. He was in terrible shape though, raving and screaming and absolutely out of his mind for 3 straight days. He began settling down after that, but it was another 5 days before I was able to see him. He lay on a cot looking thin and pale, and with his glassy eyes staring at me from where I came walking in, till I reached his bed. The scars stood up on his head as though they'd been engraved there. His voice was so weak I had to put my ear to his mouth to hear him. "What are you going to do for me, Tolliver?" I said. "What do you mean, Baylor?" I could see a vein pulsing in his head. It looked like it was going to pop. He got a hand on my wrist, digging the nails in. "I want help, Tolliver. I want a pardon. I want a pardon for saving your life. That's true, ain't it, Tolliver? I saved your life, didn't I? Didn't I? His voice was rising, becoming a scream. Didn't I save your life, Tolliver?" I worked my hand free and left him. He was raving. There was no point in staying. He screamed and cursed at me all the way to the door. He's calmed down by now. He's the old Baylor again. After all, this was some months ago. I filled out the papers, starting the ball rolling on getting him a pardon, but I know they'll never go through. They've got him on the books as crazy. They've got him down for having killed 2 people with an axe. They're not about to set old Baylor free. No. Not a chance of that. In a way, I can understand it. You don't want a man like Baylor running around loose, but there's this too. There's got to be this. It's going to be tough on me, seeing him so often in the years that lie ahead. It's going to be tough. Having him looking at me, not saying anything, just looking. Both of us knowing how it was that day in the Bayou. Yeah. That's going to be tough.
If you enjoyed this exhibit of the Mutant Museum, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter like all of these amazing people, particularly Xanazira, Michael Fattori, and Break System BSE. In the meantime, thanks for being you.